It's now my privilege to introduce Professor Abraham Silver, our special guest tonight, who I had the honor of learning from earlier this week, and I know many of you have seen him around town, but we're very blessed that you're here tonight. Professor Silver grew up in Brooklyn, and with a degree from the University of Pennsylvania, made Aliyah and moved to Kibbutz Keturah, an agricultural kibbutz in the Negev, and defended his new country in the IDF, in the Lebanon War, First Lebanon War, and throughout the First and Second Intifada. You're now a professor of the architecture of Jerusalem, which I would love to sit down on one of those classes. And you're a tour guide and have connected hundreds, thousands of people from all over the world with our homeland, with the magical and mystical places in the land of Israel. You live, of course, in Tel Aviv with your wife and 2 daughters, and we, as a community, are so blessed to have you here to share your wisdom with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom. As the Rabbi just described, I just want to say something personal, which is what I do for a living is I teach the architectural history of Jerusalem at Hebrew University. The subtext of that is love of Jerusalem. Everyone gets an A. Who doesn't love Jerusalem? And I come from Tel Aviv and I commute up to Jerusalem. What I want to talk about today is just a little bit of understanding what's happening in Israel. How are we doing? How is Israel doing? How is Israeli society doing beyond the politics and beyond everything that you see? I think I want to start with the personal, although it's a little bit hard for me, and that is what happened on October 7th was we were invaded. We were invaded in the south, but the first thing that happened before the invasion was that Hamas shot a barrage of several hundred rockets at Tel Aviv. And as you all know, we have a missile defense system, Iron Dome. Iron Dome is 99% effective, and in those hundreds of rockets shot at 4.5 million people who live in greater Tel Aviv, one rocket got through and hit my building. We became the first refugees of the war. The rocket hit the building, and even worse, the alarm system in North Tel Aviv where I live didn't go off, and we were in the apartment. Without going in through all of the details, the rocket hit directly into an apartment where nobody was, and into an apartment where there were 2 80-year-olds in their bedroom. The entire apartment was destroyed, except for the bedroom. 2 men, 35-year-old men in the building, ran through the debris and the fire, picked the 2 of them up out of their beds, and brought them outside. That was true for all of the older people in the building. The younger people grabbed all the older people and brought them outside. And while we were watching the building explode because of the gas leaks and standing on a street corner, we all looked around and we were all there. And to understand Israel and Israelis, one of the men, younger men, looked at my 2 daughters standing on a street corner and he said, "Don't worry. It's so much better to speak to contractors than it is to doctors." And my daughter had taken her cell phone with her. People made fun of me afterwards that I did not, and I said, I think I was taking my daughters with me. My wife wasn't there. She was actually in America. And my daughter, and will always remember this, picked up the phone, called the police, 911, and she said, "Our building was hit by a rocket from Gaza. You need to come, but you don't need to bring an ambulance. We're all okay." Of course, they came with the fire department and the ambulances. And that's Israel. About a half an hour later, standing on the street corner, I had gone back in the house and we had changed out of pajamas. And I did have my phone and the phone rang. I want to say it again, a half an hour after this had happened. And I answered the phone and it was the school psychologist who already knew that it had happened and it had happened to us. And she asked me how the girls were, and then she asked me how I was, and then she asked me where I was. And I told her that we were standing on the street, and she said, "Oh, no, you're not. My husband's coming right now to get you." And that's how we're doing. What happened that morning was that it happened, the invasion happened, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, 2 things had happened. Number one, the news media had declared that we were at war, and the news media actually went into the mode of helping everybody. And so did all the NGOs. All the NGOs switched gears to be able to get people out, to get people somewhere, to get people fed, to save everyone. The government wasn't there. The government didn't exist. To be honest with you, the government didn't exist for 3 weeks. And while I don't have it in my hand, there's this great screenshot of an announcement by the government that they're opening up a helpline for the people who had been evacuated on day 26 of the war. And without a government, the first thing we felt like was we were alone. We were abandoned. We didn't have anyone. But by 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as we watched the news media help and all the NGOs help, we realized we weren't alone. We had each other. And that's Israel today. We have each other. We don't need the government. We have each other. And the we that have each other was two different things. One was the generation of people that were in the NGOs, that did the volunteering, that tried to put our lives back together. But there was another we that had this. And I want to take a step back and talk about them. And that was the younger generation, the 20-somethings. Because here's what happened. 7 months earlier, we were involved in a struggle against the government, not left versus right, but the people of Israel against the government that were trying to pass laws that would have neutered the judiciary. The first protests were 30,000 people, and then 50,000 people, and then 200,000 people. And when it came to a head on the night that the prime minister tried to fire the defense minister, who had come out and proclaimed that we cannot continue the judicial reform because it was a security risk. Netanyahu tried to fire the defense minister, and that night, 800,000 people of a country of 9 million came to the streets to say no. And I was there. They stormed the Ayalon Highway in Tel Aviv. And the thing about being there and what happened was this. The bulk of the people that night, there were 800,000 people, were the 20-somethings of Israel. And they were singing a song on the Ayalon. And the song said, if you try to take our democracy, we'll overthrow the government. You've messed with the wrong generation. And while I was standing there, a young man came over and held my hand and just looked at me and he said, don't you worry, we got this. And 7 months later, we were at war, and they got it, but it was them that had to go and fight. For Israel, the attack from Hamas was what we perceived as an existential threat. Someone who was trying to attack us to kill all the Jews of Israel. And the people that stood up and said that's not going to happen were the 20-somethings. And the 20-somethings went to war. It was heartbreaking for us, anyone who had been in the army, who had fought in a war, that anyone would ever have to do that again, and especially that generation who we just saw pure joy on their faces. But they did it. And believe me, it's awful. Their souls will forever be darkened for what happened to them, what they did, and what they saw. But that's part of who we are as well. And they did it. And they did it with, let me just say how or what the motivation was first. And that is, we're a tiny country. We are those 9 million people. The people that were killed at the Nova Music Festival were all 20-somethings. Every single one of the people that went to war knew someone at Nova. They were fighting for the homeland. They were fighting for their parents. And they were also fighting for something that had happened to them personally. And they still are. That's who we are. And the thing to understand about Israel today is that there's a tremendous resilience in the older population. But there's also another thing. In America, there's an expression, the greatest generation. And America looks at the World War II veterans that they were the greatest generation. But do you know who the greatest generation is in Israel? It's the people who are on Instagram and TikTok with tattoos on their arms. It's the 20-somethings who were quintessentially Israeli and rose to the occasion to protect all of us. That's who we are, and that's what happened. No, the government doesn't really matter. We were all in it together. We, the people of Israel, are still in it together with a tremendous amount of resilience and a tremendous amount of unity. What you don't see when you're looking from here is you see Israel in the prism of a government that still is not unified and still is dysfunctional. But behind them is a people that are hanging together. That war morphed into something worse, as the veneer of the fact that it was Hamas was stripped away when it turned out that it really wasn't only Hamas. They were the puppets. The real enemy is Iran. And right now we are facing the concept that we might be at a war with Iran. They may attack us. We may wind up in a war with Iran. So how are we dealing with that? And I think this is a take-home message to understand of who we are, the Jewish people. Have we ever had adversity? Yeah, that's who we are. Have we ever had people that hate us and want to kill us? Yeah, unfortunately, that's who we are. And in the streets of Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem and Haifa today, where it's not tense, everyone's out in the pubs and everyone's out in the cafes. That includes the 20-somethings that have come home from the war with their darkened souls. And there's not a tension about the fact that Iran's going to attack us. What there is instead is the resolve that we'll survive this. And so if you meet somebody in Israel today, they'll say, what do you think? What do you think? When do you think it's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? And the response is very simply this, and I'll say it in Hebrew first. Yeh beseder. It'll be okay. Avarnu et Pharaoh. Navor gam et zeh. Hey, it'll be okay. We survived Pharaoh. We'll survive this too. And that's Israel today. We survived Pharaoh. We're slaves in Egypt, and look at us today. It'll be okay. We also say to each other, B'sorot tovot, there should only be good news. And I'm going to say that to you. Shabbat shalom. B'sorot tovot. There should be good news here and there for the Jewish people. Thank you so much, and Shabbat shalom.